Socrates, the man Athens would one day kill for asking too many questions, claimed something strange about himself. He said that, for as long as he could remember, a voice spoke to him. Not a god booming from a mountaintop. A quiet inner signal that showed up in ordinary moments and stopped him cold right before he made a mistake. His friends found it odd. His enemies used it against him at his trial, as proof the old man had lost his grip. But Socrates trusted that voice more than he trusted the opinion of his entire city. He let it guide a life that still echoes 24 centuries later. Now here's the part nobody tells you. You have a version of that same voice. You hear it when no one's around. And the moment you catch yourself using it, talking out loud in an empty room, you probably do what most people do. You feel a small flush of embarrassment. You glance over your shoulder to make sure nobody heard. So let me ask you something before we go any further. What if that reflex has it exactly backwards? You know the moment I mean. You're alone in the kitchen and you hear yourself say, "Okay, why did I actually do that?" You're walking to the car muttering, "Keys, wallet, phone," like a spell. You're rehearsing a conversation that hasn't happened yet, playing both sides, arguing with someone who isn't even in the room. And then a thought lands and you tense up. What if someone's watching? Somewhere along the way you were trained to read this habit as a warning light. Talking to yourself means you're a little off. A little lonely. A little much. So you learn to swallow the voice, to keep it underground, to do all your thinking in respectable silence. But here's what that training never once asked you to consider. The people we remember for thinking clearly, the inventors, the writers, the strategists, and yes, the philosopher who practically invented the examined life, almost all did the opposite. They let the voice out. Loudly. On purpose. Consider this. Socrates never wrote a single book. Sit with that for a second. The most influential thinker in the history of Western thought left no manuscript, no treatise, no lecture notes, nothing. His entire method was conversation. He'd stand in the marketplace, ask a question, listen, then ask another, until the person across from him slowly realized they didn't actually know what they were so certain they knew. He treated wisdom as something close to this, knowing the exact limits of what you know, and refusing to pretend otherwise. And his sharpest challenge wasn't an order. It was a question aimed straight at your own life. Is a life you never bother to examine really worth living? So here's what I want you to hold on to as we go. If Socrates believed the road to becoming a real person ran directly through questioning yourself, out loud, in dialogue, relentlessly, then what exactly are you doing when you talk to yourself in that empty room? Are you malfunctioning? Or are you running the oldest, sharpest mental software the human race ever built? Psychologists have spent decades quietly catching up to what Socrates was doing on pure instinct. And what they keep finding is that this one small habit tends to cluster in people who share 7 rare traits most of us never deliberately develop. We're going to walk through all 7. Some you'll recognize in yourself right away. But there's one, number 5, that nearly everyone gets completely wrong, because it looks like the exact opposite of what it really is. Stay with me until we reach it. Because by the end, I don't think you'll ever feel embarrassed by the voice in the empty room again. You might even start listening to it on purpose. We start with the strangest one, because everything else stands on top of it. When you catch yourself mid-sentence asking, "Wait, why did I really do that?" something quietly splits in two. One part of you acted. Another part stepped back to watch the first part act. Psychologists call this reflective awareness, and it sits at the dead center of knowing yourself. Nearly a century ago, a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky noticed that small children narrate themselves out loud to steer their own behavior, instructing, correcting, talking their way through a task. And that this private speech never really disappears as they grow. It just slips underground, becoming the inner voice that narrates your whole adult life. People who still let that voice surface tend to interrogate themselves far more than people who don't. They don't just feel angry, they ask where the anger came from. They don't just make a choice, they put it on trial. Now line that up against the words carved above the temple at Delphi, the two words Socrates made the heart of everything he did: know thyself. Not as a cozy slogan for a coffee mug. As labor. As the single hardest assignment a human being can be handed. Because most people drift through the entire day on autopilot, reacting, scrolling, performing, never once turning to study the one person they understand the least, which is themselves. So here's the quiet turn. The voice in the empty room isn't you talking to no one. It's you finally sitting down with the one person Socrates spent his whole life telling you to go meet. There's a reason engineers mutter at whiteboards and chess players whisper through their moves. The instant you say a problem out loud, you force your brain to slow down and drag a fog of half-formed thoughts into precise, committed words. Researchers call it the self-explanation effect, and study after study lands on the same result: people who explain a problem to themselves understand it more deeply, and solve it more reliably, than people who just sit and stare and think. Speaking pulls a tangled knot of ideas into a single thread you can actually follow. Each sentence becomes a step. Each step exposes the next gap. And suddenly the wall you've been stuck against turns out to have a door cut into it. There's a bonus hidden in here, too. The moment a bad plan hits the open air, it sounds wrong in a way it never did while it was sealed inside your skull. Your own voice quietly becomes a quality control check, running in real time. Now, does that process remind you of anyone? It's almost exactly the Socratic method, turned inward. Socrates didn't lecture answers at people. He'd ask a question, listen to the reply, then ask the one question that exposed the crack running through it. When you talk yourself through a problem, you're playing both Socrates and the student, the questioner and the questioned, sharing one head. So the next time you're stuck and you start murmuring, don't apologize for it. You're not losing the thread. You're cross-examining it. Here's a small experiment you can run on yourself. The next time your chest tightens before something hard, don't say, "I'm so anxious." Use your own name instead. Say, quietly, "Okay, you've handled worse than this, you'll handle this too." It sounds almost silly the first time. But Ethan Kross, a psychologist at the University of Michigan, has spent years studying exactly this strange little shift, and what he found is hard to wave away. When people talk to themselves using their own name, or the word, you, instead of I, they open up a small psychological distance from their own emotion. They stop drowning inside the feeling and start coaching themselves through it. In his research, people who used that kind of distanced self-talk before a stressful task felt less anxious, performed measurably better, and recovered faster once it was over. The same mind that was about to spiral got talked back down off the ledge, by its own owner. And this is exactly where Socrates steps quietly back into the room. Remember that inner voice he trusted, the one that interrupted him before he acted rashly? Distanced self-talk is a homemade version of the same thing. It's a signal from a steadier part of you, standing one pace outside the panic, asking, is this fear actually telling you the truth right now, or is it just telling you a story? Most people get swept straight into the current. The self-talker stands one step back on the bank, dry enough to choose. That isn't weakness mumbling to itself. That's a mind refusing to be ruled by its own loudest emotion. Listen closely to almost any inventor, novelist, or painter at work, and you'll catch the same thing again and again. They talk to themselves, sometimes non-stop. It isn't a charming quirk. It may be part of the actual engine. Creativity, stripped to its core, is the act of connecting things that don't obviously belong together. And speaking your thoughts out loud lets you do something silent thinking genuinely struggles with. You can argue with yourself. You can play both characters at once. You can ask, but what if, in one voice and answer in a completely different one. A conversation with no one quietly becomes a brainstorm with a whole room full of versions of you. When ideas stay locked inside your head, they keep tracing the same worn grooves, the same safe loops. But spoken aloud, an idea is forced to take a shape, and a shape can be picked up, turned over, challenged, snapped in half, fused with another. This is dialogue used as a tool, which is the most Socratic idea there is. Socrates didn't believe truth got handed down in a finished, sealed block. He believed it got born in the space between two voices testing each other. So when you talk to yourself, you've taken that entire agora, the noisy marketplace of clashing opinions, and folded it down into a single skull. Which means the next time you catch yourself pacing and muttering and answering your own questions, you're not coming apart. You're holding the oldest kind of conversation there is. The only odd detail is that everyone seated at the table happens to be you. Now here's the one I promised you, and the one almost everyone misjudges. We assume focus is silent. Head down, mouth shut, jaw locked. But psychologists have found the opposite can be just as true. In one well-known study, researchers asked people to find a specific object hidden in a cluttered, busy scene, and when participants simply said the name of what they were hunting for out loud, they found it faster. The spoken word sharpened their attention and yanked the target right out of the visual noise. Athletes have known this for years. Sports psychologists keep showing that short instructional cues, eyes up, follow through, stay low, measurably lift performance under pressure. The voice becomes a coach, steering attention back the very instant the mind starts to drift. And you've done it yourself without ever noticing, repeating a phone number until you can write it down, chanting, keys, wallet, phone, at the door, walking yourself through a recipe one step at a time. In each case, your own voice locks your attention onto one single thing and shuts the rest of the world out. So why does this catch us off guard? Because we were taught that the disciplined mind is a quiet one. But Socrates didn't reach clarity by going silent. He reached it by speaking, question after question after question, out loud, refusing to let the conversation wander off. Focus, it turns out, isn't the absence of a voice. Sometimes it's the presence of exactly the right one. So let me put the question straight to you: when you most need to concentrate, are you silencing your sharpest tool, or are you finally using it? Most people, the moment they feel unsure, reach outward. They ask around, they scroll, they hunt for someone, anyone, to tell them what to think. People who talk to themselves have somewhere else to turn first. Inward. They've built the habit of running an idea past their own judgment before borrowing anybody else's. When you regularly think out loud, you get used to the actual sound of your own reasoning. You learn to question it, test it, poke holes in it, and trust it when it genuinely holds up under the pressure. You grow comfortable sitting alone with a hard problem instead of needing a crowd to hand you the answer. And over time, that builds something genuinely uncommon, a person who can stand on their own conclusions. Now, Socrates drew a hard line between two things. There was doxa, mere opinion, the second-hand stuff you absorb from everyone around you without ever checking it. And there was real knowledge, the kind you've examined yourself and actually earned. Almost everyone lives their whole life inside doxa. They quietly mistake what's popular for what's true. The person arguing with themselves in private is doing, in their own kitchen, what Socrates did out in the open square, refusing to swallow a borrowed belief just because the crowd repeating it is loud and confident. And here's the part that surprises people. This doesn't make them stubborn. Because they're so willing to argue with themselves, they're often quicker than anyone to admit when they're wrong. They just don't need the world's permission to feel certain. They've already had the only conversation that really settles it, the one with themselves. Now notice the thread running underneath all of this. The self-aware person examines themselves. The problem solver catches their own mistakes before anyone else does. The steady one coaches themselves through the hardest moments. Put all of it together and you get someone who is, in effect, permanently in conversation with the person they're trying to become. People who talk to themselves tend to treat their own life like an ongoing project. After a hard day, they replay it. What could I have done differently there? Before a big moment, they rehearse it out loud. When they fail, they don't just sit in the bad feeling, they turn to the failure and ask what it actually came to teach them. That inner dialogue isn't idle background chatter. It's a feedback loop, a quiet, constant cycle of reflection and adjustment. And this is what real growth actually is, the mechanism underneath it, not dramatic leaps on a mountaintop, but thousands of small, private conversations where you hold yourself accountable, forgive yourself, and decide to try again tomorrow. This is the examined life, lived in the smallest possible moments. Socrates warned that a life you never examine is barely worth living. The self-talker examines theirs every single day, not once a year, not in some grand ceremony, but in the car, in the kitchen, in the dark right before sleep. Most people never have those conversations at all. So here's the question buried under the whole habit. If growth is really just the examined life, repeated quietly and daily, then who's more alive? The one murmuring to themselves in the empty room, or the one too embarrassed to ever start? Step back now and look at what all 7 have in common, because it's far bigger than any one of them alone. Self-awareness, problem-solving, steadier emotions, creativity, focus, independence, growth, these aren't 7 separate gifts handed out at random. They're 7 faces of a single thing. A mind in honest dialogue with itself. And that's the reframe I want to leave sitting with you. We've been taught to picture thinking as something silent and solitary, one mind alone in the dark, sealed shut. But Socrates saw it completely differently. To him, the truest thinking was always a conversation. 2 voices, testing each other, questioning, circling back, refusing every easy answer. So what the voice in the empty room really proves is that you never actually stopped having that conversation. You just moved the whole marketplace inside. The strange habit Athens once mocked, the one your own embarrassment keeps telling you to hide, it may be the closest most of us ever get to doing real philosophy without ever knowing the word for it. So go back to where we started. Socrates trusted the voice inside him over the loud opinion of an entire city, and that city killed him for it, and here we are, 24 centuries later, still turning over the questions he asked. You carry a smaller, quieter version of that same voice. And every single time you've shushed it, glanced around the room, and felt that hot little flush of embarrassment, you were apologizing for the one thing that might be most worth protecting. So the next time you catch yourself talking to yourself when nobody's around, don't flinch. Ask instead, what is this voice trying to show me about who I'm becoming? Because the thing the world is so quick to call odd might just be the sound of a mind that flatly refuses to stop examining itself. And the strangest part is, you've had it the whole time. Now I'm genuinely curious about you. Of these 7, which one landed closest to home, and be honest with yourself when you answer. Drop it in the comments, and while you're at it, tell me the truth, do you talk to yourself when you're alone? If this handed you a new way to hear that voice, share it with the person you argue with most, and yes, you absolutely count as that person, and subscribe, because every video here pulls back the curtain on the hidden patterns quietly running your life.